Good morning, Morai Rabotai. We are continuing on our journey through Shas in our Amud Yomi, and we are starting a new Masechta today, Masechet Succah, Be'ezra Hashem. So we're holding on Daf Bet Amud Aleph, and today's Amud is being learned as a zchut for Refuah Shelema of Rachel Simcha Bat Nahid, that should have full recovery, Refuah Shelema. Also, Esther Bracha Bat Haya, the little girl that has had the incident, Bezat Hashem should be a Refuah Shelema for her as well. This month's learning of the community has been graciously dedicated by the Dayan family, the Kohen family, and the Shea families. Should be an ultimate zchut for all of their families, Be'ezrat Hashem. Amen. Today's learning also has been dedicated for the Refuah Shelema of a little boy that is having surgery momentarily right now, Haron ben Rivka Kohen, that should have a full recovery, Refuah Shelema, Be'ezrat Hashem. Amen. And last but not least, this week's learning of the community has been dedicated for the Ilui Neshama of Shlomo ben Yitzchak Chaim, that his Neshama should have an Aliyah, Be'ezrat Hashem. Amen. Okay, so Masechet Sukkah comes in Seder Moed after Masechet Yuma, because Masechet Yuma discusses primarily the halachot of Yom Kippurim, and again, of course, after Yom Kippur, right away comes Sukkot. So therefore, the order is really the same way as we have it: Rosh Hashanah, and then Yuma, and then Sukkah. Going through the three holidays, this is a Yerach HaEtanim. Chodesh Tishrei is called Yerach HaEtanim. Etan means strong because it is strong in the number of mitzvot that we have. Is the seventh month of the Hebrew calendar, and as 7 mitzvot. You have the mitzvah of Shofar on Rosh Hashanah. You have the mitzvah of Ta'anit, the Inui on Yom Kippurim. You have the mitzvah of Sukkah, Yeshivat Sukkah, and the 4 species of Arba Minim, each one being a mitzvah by themselves, the 7 mitzvot. But really, in Masechet Sukkah itself, you have 7 mitzvot as well, and the different parts of the Masechta are dedicated to the different elements of those 7 mitzvot, as well as we discuss. Again, in a simple way, the Meiri explains that the first perek of Masechet that we're going to be discussing is about building a sukkah, what constitutes a kosher sukkah, as we'll jump right in to the Mishnah in the very beginning, that cuts through the issue right away. What is considered a kosher height? What is considered a height that's pasul, and the walls, and so on and so forth. The second perek, like the Aruch Laner explains, is primarily dedicated to the mitzvah of Yeshivat Sukkah, dwelling in Sukkah. Who is chayav to dwell in Sukkah? How do you dwell in Sukkah? Are you mechuyav to sleep in the Sukkah? Can you sleep a little bit outside the Sukkah? Eat outside the Sukkah? Drink outside the Sukkah? And so on and so forth. So that's the primarily dedicated to dwelling in the Sukkah. So that's first and second prakim, building a Sukkah, dwelling in Sukkah. The third perek is the second aspect of Chag HaSukkot, which is the Arba Minim, right? We have the mitzvah V'ulkachtem lachem b'yom harishon of taking the lulav and etrog, hadasim and aravot, and primarily the third perek is dedicated what is considered a kosher lulav, what's considered a kosher etrog, and so on and so forth. And the third aspect of our Masechta is going to be in Prakim Dalit and Hey, which discuss the korbanot that they would bring in Chag HaSukkot, plus the mitzvah of Simchat HaChag, of V'samachta b'chagecha, v'ayita ach sameach, and the mitzvah of Nisuch HaMayim, which really went together. Well, as we'll unfold this whole issue, we'll see that the Nisuch HaMayim had a lot to do with what we call nowadays Simchat Bet HaShoeva. This was the remnants that we have nowadays left over from Simchat Bet HaShoeva and Chol HaMoed, is because every night of Chol HaMoed they had this concept of pouring the water on the Mizbeach, Nisuch HaMayim, Shemisham Shavim Ruach HaKodesh. It was a tremendous experience to the degree that the Gemara says, Mi shelo ra'a Simchat Bet HaShoeva, someone that did not see, did not witness Simchat Bet HaShoeva, lo ra'a Simcha meyamav. He has never ever experienced Simcha in his life. So that the significance of that and why that is and how it was done is going to be in the last parak of Masechet Succah. This is a loaded Masechta with tremendous sugyas, amazing information. And unlike the previous two Masechtas of both Rosh Hashanah and Yuma and Psachim, especially the previous Masechtas in Seder Moed that are heavy loaded on the sugyas of Tumah Vatara, the complex sugyot of Korbanot and Tumah Vatara. Masechet Sukkah is very light on that. Almost nothing of Tumah Vatara is all straightforward. Those 4/5 concepts that we just discussed right now, very much also Nogea L'Maaseh as we exit Chag HaSukkot and we're still hovering over the Isru Chag of Chag HaSukkot. Kasher alai predatchem, like the Gemara says. Hashem says, it's hard for me to let you go. So this is how we cling to Masechet Sukkah, to the concept of Sukkah, Bezrat Hashem, by studying together the Masechta and learning about the Halacha. So without further ado, B'Shem Hashem Na'aseh V'Nasliach, we're starting the first Mishnah. Sukkah she'hi givoah lemala me-20 ama psula. The very first Mishnah, famous Mishnah, which is repeated in different ways in Shas several times. Sukkah she'hi givoah lemala me-20 ama psula. If you have a sukkah that's higher than 20 amot, that is pasul. Why it is, we'll see in the Gemara momentarily. The Rabbi Yehuda machshir. Rabbi Yehuda says, no, it's not a problem. It could be high 20 amot, no problem. V'she'ena givoha asarat tfachim. What's the minimum? So the maximum is 20 amot, right? What's the minimum? Asarat tfachim. You have to have asarat tfachim. Actually, this is in Gaza, in the war that we're witnessing right now. Many of the soldiers actually made sukkot that they were mamash bare minimum. They didn't want it to be having any visibility by the enemy forces. So they mamash made a sukkah that's asarat tfachim. It's this high, you could crawl into it, and it's kasher. So that's the minimum is asarat tfachim. We will see in the Gemara why less than asarat tfachim would be pasul. If I'm crawling into it anyways, why can't I just make a sukkah that fits my body sleeping, and I'll just roll inside and sleep like an army crawl? That should be also kasher. We'll see why that is going to be pasul. Says the Mishnah, V'she'ena shlosh lefanot. You also need to have a minimum of 3 walls, as we'll see in the Gemara. It doesn't have to necessarily be 3 full walls. It's going to be shnaim kilchatan, ushlishit afilu tefach. It's going to be 3 walls subtotal, but not necessarily 3 full walls. The third one could be even a tefach. Where this tefach is going to be, can it be not attached to the other 2 on an L shape? Can the 2 walls be in front of each other instead of next to each other? And all the details of that we shall see as well. And also a sukkah that its shade is less than its sun. Because again, the concept of sukkah, why is the name of the hot sukkah? It comes from the word schach, right? we'll see the walls, the quality of the walls are almost irrelevant. The main halachot of Sukkah are primarily dependent on the schach. All the restrictions are going to be on the schach, and hence the name of Sukkah, which means schach. So therefore, if I have more sun than shade, the shade is batel to the sun. There's no schach. There's no Sukkah. So therefore it has to be silata meruba mechamata. It has to be shade more than the sun. Now, we will discuss this in depth, what it means. And again, a lot of this has to do with practical halacha as well, both for those in California who use the palm leaves, and then 5 days in, it shrivels in and becomes smaller because it dries up, or for those who use the Lowe's, Home Depot bamboo mats that are cheaper, less high quality, and the bamboos are very flimsy, very thin, and they are attached, and when you put it on one layer only, you could have more sun than shade. And when we say more sun than shade, are we talking about up there on the schach more divide between the bamboos than the bamboo itself, or are we talking about down on the floor where the shade matters, that when you measure the shade is less than sun? All of that we will discuss. But however we slice it, and we will discuss this at length, if you have silata, if you have chamata meruba misilata, the sun is more than the shade, your sukkah is pasul. Says the Gemara, Tanan Hatam. Right away the Gemara draws a parallel with a Mishnah in Masechet Eruvin that we have studied basically the same exact thing. Now, preface to this, in Masechet Eruvin, we have a concept of Eruvei Chaserot, Veshitufe Mevoot. What is a maboy? Maboy is an alleyway of a dead-end alley, cul-de-sac we would call it here basically, that has 3 walls, and one side is open to the public domain of Reshut Harabim. Now, we all know we cannot carry in Reshut Harabim. What is the halacha of a public domain, which means it's a street, but it's not really considered Reshut Harabim, because one of the many requirements for a street to be considered Reshut Harabim, and by the way, in parentheses, we use this all the time nowadays in our Eruv, one of the main reasons that people are able to carry on Shabbat within an Eruv is because of a Shitav Chazon Ish, which we'll discuss as the Sugya develops, that most of our streets are considered dead end because of the curves that they have and so on. But a Reshut Harabim must be mefulash, what we call an open-ended street, for it to be considered, from Torah law, we're talking about Deoraita, can be considered Reshut Harabim. If you have a dead-end street, from the viewpoint of the Torah, that is considered a bona fide Reshut HaYachid. You could completely carry in it from the standpoint of the Torah. No problem. But came along Chazal and said, wait, this is mamash open to the street, right? And people are carrying kids, women, the woman is schmoozing with the stroller walking, and before you know it, they're in the street, because mamash, this is connected with the Reshut Harabim. So in order to make sure that people don't make that grave mistake of carrying in the Reshut Harabim, what Chazal instituted was, we need a heker. We need to have a reminder. So what's the reminder? You will have lechi, korah, right? You sometimes could have a beam on top of this alleyway as you enter from the alleyway to the actual Reshut Harabim street. And when you have a beam, people see that this is different reshuyot. It's not doesn't flow into another domain, it's a separate domain. You see a doorway, you see a surata petach, you see a beam on top. It's like a door, and that reminds you. Fine. How high could this beam be? That's a Mishnah in Eruvin. It's an identical sister Mishnah to our Mishnah over here. It's mamash identical. And the Gemara picks a very subtle difference between the language used there and here, and we learn a bunch of things from it, as we'll see in the Gemara. So right away the Gemara says, Tananatan, we learned in Masechet Eruvin. If you have this alleyway, the dead end cul-de-sac, that you want to put this beam on top as a surata petach, if that is higher than 20 amot, exactly like our Mishnah, yema'et, you have to bring it lower for it to be kasher, which aka means if it's higher than 20 amot is pasul. It's the same thing as our Mishnah. But the Mishnah does not say it like ours. By us, it doesn't say bring it lower. The sukkah the schach is higher than 20 amot, bring it lower. As we'll see in the Gemara, that also works, right? But the Mishnah doesn't say that. It just tells you it's pasul. Over there in Eruvin, it tells you, doesn't say it's pasul. It says bring it lower. Well, says, why the difference? Says the Mishnah is literally identical with ours. The same Rabbi Yehuda that in our Mishnah says that sukkah that's higher than 20 is kasher. Over there also says the eruv, the beam, the korah that's higher than 20 amot is kasher. Like literally identical language, with that one difference of yema'et versus pasul. So tenan hatam maboy shuk avo amestrim ama yema'et. Rabbi Yehuda omer eno sarich. Rabbi Yehuda says you don't have to bring it lower. It's kasher. So my shena gabe sukkah de tani pasula, my shena gabe maboy de tani takanta. Mara says, is there any reason why over here in our Masechta and Sukkah, you say Sukkah that's higher than 20 is pasul, and over there you don't say it's pasul, you just say lower it, make it lower. You give me the fix, you give me the takana. So says the Gemara, yes. Sukkah deoraita tani psula, maboy de rabanan tani takanta. Sukkah is deoraita, is a concept deoraita. Therefore, you could say pasul. I'll explain this to you both according to Rashi and Tosafot. Rashi understands that sukkah needs to be less than 20 amot on a deoraita level. And therefore, even before Mishnayot was written, before the Torah Sheba'al Peh was said to us, if you would ask halacha, what's the halacha of a sukkah, it will be pasul. So before the Rebbe wrote the Mishnayot, we already know this is pasul. This is invalid. But by Eruvin, the whole concept is the Rabbanan. Midoraita, this alley, this dead end cul-de-sac is considered a bona fide Reshut HaRabim, Reshut HaYachid rather. You carry, it's only Midrabanan. So before the Mishnah was said, I don't even know if it's pasul or not. So you could tell me, lower it. Mashenken, in Sukkah, the din, the halacha, it's known even before the Mishnayot was written by Rabbi. Therefore, we could say pasul. Tosafot says something more fundamental. Tosafot says, look, it's a very simple thing. Sukkah is deoraita. Therefore, if you make a mistake, a little mistake, the whole thing would be pasul. So we don't want to tell you fix it, because if I would say sukkah that's higher than 20, bring it lower. You know what you would think? You would think, oh, but the Eved is kasher. Lachatchila, you have to bring it lower. And then you would make a mistake, the whole thing would be out. You're dealing with the deoraita safek. It's like almost like the Gemara says in Chulin Lavav, safek deoraita the chumrah. We don't want to play games with deoraita mitzvot. Eruvin, the whole thing is the Rabbanan. So if I tell you, we're not so concerned that you're going to make a grave mistake, even if you make a mistake, at the end of the day, it's not a biblical thing. So therefore, I could deal with information and tell you, bring it lower, it's kasher. We're not concerned that you're going to think, oh, lechatchila, b'di'evet. We're not concerned about that. So that's the difference, says the Gemara. Gemara says another fundamental reason for it as well. If you want, I'll tell you a simple answer. Simple but fundamental. I would have really said a fix, even for a mitzvah d'oraita. Even for Sukkah, if I could, I would tell you how to fix it in the Mishnah. You know why the Mishnah didn't say it? Because he couldn't have. Why? Because how many halachot we learned in the Mishnah above? You may have missed it because it's just 3 lines, but there are 4 halachot about Sukkah that we learned in these 3 lines. So if you want to tell me a fix, you have to say 4 different fixes, and that's a very lengthy language. Rabbeinu HaKadosh, Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, wrote the Mishnayot in the shortest way possible. Right? Like the Gemara says, Le'olam yeshaneh adam letalmidav lashon ktsara. Gemara Pesachim, the Gemara Pesachim, Daf Gimel Amud Bet, says a Rebbe should always teach his students the shortest language. This way they will remember the language, especially Mishnah that was supposed to be known by heart. So Rebbe wrote it in the shortest way possible. By Mishnah in Eruvin, there is only one halacha discussed in the Mishnah. This beam is higher than 20. What's the halacha? Yema'et, bring it lower, chazak u'baruch, done. Our Mishnah has 4 halachot in it. What are the 4? Well, the first one is, if the sukkah is higher than 20, it's pasul. So you should say, if it's higher than 20, bring it lower. Then the Mishnah says, if it's lower than 10 amot, 10 tfachim, it's pasul. So then you should say also, if it's less than 10 tfachim, make it raised up, make it higher. If he has 3 walls, it's kasher. If he doesn't have 3 walls, add walls, right? Yeah, you would have to say every detail. If the shade is not as much as the sun, if the sun is more than the shade, then you have to say, fix it by adding schach, right? 4 different halachot, that's already too much. So therefore, the Mishnah said one word. If you have this, or this, or this, or this, it's pasul. How do you deal with it? Yeah, well, we could deal with it. We'll learn the Gemara how you deal with it. But the Mishnah, Rebbe chose lashon ktsara. So says the Gemara, ve'ibait ema bedoraita nami takana. We could have, should have, would have used a takana to say how to fix the sukkah. Also, just like the beam in Eruvin, mius sukkah denafish milta pasik vetani psula. Because there are 4 halachot in the Mishnah, it just tells you the applicable language, the language that applies to all of them, which is psula. But maboy, de lo nafish milte. But in Eruvin, it's only 1 halacha. Therefore, Tani, Takanta, tells you how to fix it. So now the Gemara says, Menan, how do you even know that above 20 is pasul? Why should it be pasul? Nice, beautiful, tall sukkah. Why should it be pasul? Menan, how do we know? So the Gemara is going to bring a 3-way machloket amoraim. Why the reason is that a tall sukkah lemala mi esrim ama is going to be pasul. First is Rabbah. Amar Rabbah, Damar Kra. We learn it from the pasuk. Leman yed'u dorotechem ki basukot hoshavti et bnei Israel ve'otzi otam eretz Mitzrayim. The pasuk says, I am commanding you to sit in sukkah because I want everyone to know. Leman yed'u. I want them to know that they're sitting in the sukkah because I sat bnei Israel in the sukkah. So says Rabbah, if they have to know that they're sitting in the sukkah, they have to notice the schach. Because again, sukkah is the schach, is the ceiling. So until 20 amot, you notice the schach when you walk in. When something is so tall, more than 20 amot, you don't necessarily recognize the schach when you come in, and therefore it's a problem. Until 20 amot, you notice the schach, you know you're living in the sukkah. That's the first one. you have to notice the schach when you enter. Mishum de lo shalta bayna, because above 20 amot, your eye doesn't catch the schach. Fine. That's Rabbah. Let's remember these three Amoraim, because the Gemara is going to deal with each one, why, if they agree with each other, and why not. Rabbi Zera is the second one. Rabbi Zera Amar mehacha vesukat tiyeh lesel yomam. The pasuk says in Yeshaya Navi Perek Dalet, defining the mitzvah of sukkah, that sukkah is going to be the shade during the day, during the sun hours. Vesukat tiyeh lesel yomam. And again, remember, throughout the whole Masechet, whenever we say sukkah means the schach, we falsely think of sukkah as the body of the sukkah that you buy in Sukkah Depot, right? Sukkah means the schach. So when the pasuk in Yeshaya says that sukkah has to be the cell, sukkah has to be the shade, what does it mean? You should be sitting in the shade of the schach. Well, guess what happens if your sukkah is too tall? You're not sitting in the shade of the schach, you're sitting in the shade of the wall, generally speaking. Obviously, we understand it depends how wide the sukkah is and so on, but generally speaking, you're going to be sitting in the cell, the shade of the fanot of the walls. Adis Rimama says Rabbi Zera, until 20 amot, generally speaking, you're sitting still, at least the good part of the day, you're sitting in the shade of the sukkah, in the shade of the schach. Lemala Mesri Mama. Above 20 amot, ein adam yoshev besel sukkah, ela besel defanot. You're no longer sitting in, generally speaking, in the shade of the schach, of the ceiling, but you're really using the shade of the defanot, of the walls. So Abaye right away jumps on this. He says, wait a second. Amar Abaye, ela ma'ata oseh sukkato b'ashtrot karnayim, achinami dela aves sukkah. If you go in a valley in between two mountains, right? Massive mountains. And you build a sukkah there, it's going to be pasul because you're sitting in the shade of the mountains? What kind of thing is that? Amaleh, Rabbi Zera right away fires back, says, no. You missed something fundamentally important, and that is, Hatam, dal ashtrot karnaim ikatzel sukkah. Over there, I don't need the mountains to be. There just happens to be where I am is mountains around it. If you take out the mountains, I'm sitting in the shade of sukkah. Essentially and internally, my shade is a kosher shade because if you take the mountains away, I have a kasher sukkah there. But by a tall sukkah, if you take the walls, I don't have a sukkah. That is my sukkah. And yet, I am not sitting under the shade of the schach. I'm sitting under the shade of the walls. HaChadal defanot lekatzel sukkah. Says the Gemara, the third and final shita of the Amoraim is Rava. So far we had Rabbah, who said, Leman yedu dorotechem, that as you enter the sukkah, you should notice the schach right away, and if it's too tall, you can't notice it. We had Rabbi Zera that says you have to be sitting, generally speaking, under the shade of the schach, and if it's too tall, you're not sitting in the shade of the schach, you're sitting in the shade of the walls. And the final one is Rabbah. Rabbah says, Mehacha, a different pasuk. Basukot teshavu shivat yamim. You should dwell in sukkah 7 days, which means Amra Torah. The Rabbah explains the pasuk that the Torah is demanding Kol shivat hayamim tzeh midirat keva v'sheb bedirat aray. I want you to dwell in a 7-day house. 7-day house is a temporary house, right? So I want you to dwell in a temporary house. Rabbah says, if the Torah is telling you that you must be dwelling in a temporary house, ad 20 amot adam oseh dirato dirat aray, up until 20 amot tall, a person makes their house dirat aray. You can make a flimsy structure. You bang some nails together with some wood and some boards, and yalla, you zip tie some stuff together, and you put a schach and you daven that's not going to fall on your head, and Hazaku Baruch. That's enough. You don't have to make a sturdy, engineered structure for a 7-day dwelling. If it's too tall, anything that becomes tall, again, there's science in this in building high-rises. The higher you make it, the more foundation you need, the more strength you need in the wind, right? Every inch that you make it taller has to be much stronger to withstand winds and so on and so forth, right? In high-rises, that's how it is. Now, in a miniature world, even though it's not high-rise, but if you make something, the 20 amot is pretty tall, right? That's 30 feet tall. 30 feet it needs to be pretty sturdy and strong for it to not collapse on your head. So says Rava, I see it from there. Up until 20 amot, you can make something flimsy. Higher than 20, you need to make a structure that's sturdy, and therefore the Torah is telling you that it can't be higher than 20 amot. Says the Gemara, למעלה מ-20 אמה, אין אדם עושה דירתו דירת ארעי, אלא דירת קבע. And the Gemara asks immediately a question. אמר לאביי, אלא מעתה עשה מחיצות של ברזל ושיחך על גבן, הכי נמי דלה וסוכה? Are you suggesting that I can't have strong walls for my sukkah? Forget about 20 amot. I want to have a regular 8-foot, 10-foot sukkah. Are you suggesting that I can have like metal, nice, beautiful panels of sukkah? Amale, Rabbi answers, he says, no. Hachi kamina. What I'm telling you is, ad kaf amma, until 20 amot, the adam oseh dirato dirat aray, that you can make a flimsy structure, then your sukkah is kasher regardless of how you make it. Even if you make it from cement, and it's bulletproof and tank proof, yeah, it's kasher. But after that, higher than 20 amot, lemala mikaf amma, higher than 20 amot, the adam oseh dirato dirat keva, that a person cannot make a flimsy structure. It must be something solid and sturdy. Then even if you make it flimsy, it's going to be pasul. It's essentially not kasher. Ki avid dirat aray nami lo nafik. Even if you do it, a temporary structure is going to be pasul. Now we will have many cases in the Gemara that a sturdy structure is going to be kasher, including if the ceiling of your living room comes down and you put schach on it. If you have dofar akuma and all those things that we're going to study, it's kasher. Actually, many of you probably saw last week how one of the soldiers had used one of the structures that was bombed, and you had the two walls and the ceiling above the corner L-shaped wall was completely gone, and he just made a third wall with some military items there, and he put some schach on top, and he was sitting there with talit and learning or davening at a beautiful sight of a sukkah that's kasher. We'll mamash have that case in the Gemara itself, even though the walls are from cement, they're mamash sturdy. That's not a problem, but it has to be a height that could be built as a temporary structure, and that is the cutoff with that is 20 amot, and that's how we know that is kasher. One more thing that we probably will open up afterwards. Then what I'm saying over here, Abaye's question says, well, if you have barzel, if you have walls made out of metal, you want to say it's pasul, which seems to suggest that if your walls are made out of barzel, the sukkah is kasher. Abai said, well, you're going to say it's pasul if you made it out of barzel, right? Obviously, that begs a question whether or not you could hold your schach on top of a metal, right? Which is something that people deal with. Actually, the pipe structures of sukkah, that's metal that is used by majority of people nowadays, can you lay the schach on top of that, is something we will actually study together, whether or not a ma'amid of the schach could be a davar hamekabel tum'ah. Can you have something that is susceptible to tum'ah as the foundation upon which your schach lays and stands on? We'll see that it's not so simple, even though the Marash Charuch will be mekel, the Ramah is going to be machmir, and the minhag is to be machmir. How do we deal with this comment of Abaye, and how that turns into halacha le'maaseh for the sukkot that we have nowadays, is something that Be'ezrat Hashem we will pick up in the next year. Chazak u'baruch.